social development in the sense that we haven't developed enough capacity to be able to get our resources. But a lot of it, a lot of revenue is also lost in terms of leakages coming out of trade, where some of it is mispricing. And this is where also our legal and other, particularly accountings and others, need to come in to make sure that first the agreements that we have, particularly in the extractive industries, and also in the area of trade, that what we are giving out is arrested by way of losses. Now, some of the areas, for instance, if you look at the mining industry, if you look at the oil industry, if you look at fisheries industry, timber industry, tourism industry is unique in a way because Africa does not seem to benefit as much as we would have liked to see, because if you look at it, there's a lot of foreign content in it. And so you could be having a very vibrant tourist activity. But actually, when you look at the revenue flows, because the consumption, what takes place in there, the ownership and the activities that take place, a lot of those resources are not being retained in the economy. And so this is where we need now to be very smart. But a lot of it is also because at the domestic level, there is a huge gap from the taxpayer's point of view and also the government trying to bring information to the taxpayer so that the taxpayer, first of all, feels to be part of that equation. That tax is not something that you pay to somebody you don't know where it goes. It is very clearly indicated that in some of the countries, for instance, I've been privileged to be in Denmark. Denmark, if you look at the rate of taxation, is quite high, by the way. It's quite high. It's one of the highest in the world. But the people are so happy to pay taxes. Why are the people so happy to pay taxes? Because the services they receive. And so it is not so much the problem of the tax collector that is. It is those who use these taxes who need to utilize it in such a way that you demonstrate to the population the benefits they're getting, that your infrastructure is working, that when you need to go to the best of your hospital, you can be able to get there, that you can get your education, that your pension check will arrive on time. And so that encourages the taxpayer to feel that they should be able to pay taxes. But that means that we as professionals also, we need first of all to put those who use, that's why your parliaments, but also as taxpayers, to put pressure or governance to ensure that we have that partnership. It is not so much of policing, but it is so much of the partnership, that you feel that things are working for you, and therefore you feel also proud to be part of the tax process. But there are some areas which I think we also need to look at. If you look at the problem of taxation in many countries, one, when an economy is not doing well, the people will always not be really out to want to pay taxes. So the overall economic well-being is important. But beyond that, the tax should be such that it must respond to the economic rhythm of the country. If a tax is way out of the economic rhythm, people will feel not motivated to pay. And that is important. The second one, the tax processes should be simple enough. This is where a lot of criticisms also come in if you make the tax process very complicated, out of touch, out of reach, you discourage taxpayers. And so having that process near, and I want to commend the KRA, some of the processes that at least I've seen. I haven't been privileged to live here for a long time. I've been, as you heard, very much somebody lived outside. But even when I live outside, I'm able to pay my taxes because all you do is get online and pay that, your tax. So innovations of that nature make it easier, and so you make the process. But also, even the process of how you calculate. The recent process, for instance, I remember if you had a property tax to pay some 4 or 5 years ago, it was so difficult to work out what is the allowables and non-allowables. But the current process, for instance, where you say it's 10% of your rental, is so simple, and so it's easier. That's what I mean. And so that is extremely important to make that process much easier. The second one is providing education to the people so that they can understand how the tax process works, so that they can understand. And having something like this tax week is very important. It should be, I'm happy that you're having this event, have some highlights like appreciating some of the corporates that have been able to pay their tax on time and give them some recognition, but also individuals that have been very up to, meeting their obligations in society. That in a way that also then brings the tax to the people. One point that I must then make here is, if you look at the current scenario of our budgets, in fact, I was looking at the deficit. If you look at the budget, for instance, what is collected as revenue and what you want to spend as your expenditure, the gap is quite big. In fact, a country like Sweden, the tax rate is so high, and if you look at the revenue, it's very small. I mean, the gap is only 0.8. Now, I guess you know that in the case of, for instance, Kenya, I was looking, it's over 20%. Now, that is something that we should always look at. How do we close that gap? Because when that gap is high, what it means then? The government must then resort to either borrowing, and that will have impact on the money market, or hopefully there will be some inflows from outside. And so it's important for us to constantly keep our eyes to see that even our expenditure is contained to the level that is within what we collect. That, of course, is beyond you as the tax collector, but it also requires that for those taxpayers out there, and this is part of the professionals, that we must start to scrutinize our budgeting process to make sure that what we are doing is, first of all, will add value to the economy, because, as we said, the GDP, government expenditure is vital. And if that is important, it stimulates the economy, and in turn, you get more revenue. And so that would mean the budget, where we are spending the money, must be closely looked at, because it will make your work very difficult if the taxpayer feels the money they're giving is not yielding enough returns. In other words, the value for money also requires that we get maximum return, and that is something that is extremely important from the taxpayer and tax collector point of view. And so, I would like, in conclusion, to propose the following. One, it's important for us to continue as professionals to look at the issue of technology and innovation in all aspects, whether it has got to do with negotiations on our mining rights or technology on how you pay tax. That is extremely important. And here I should say, particularly for sustainable. You know, when we're talking of sustainable, if you look at the issue of tax, the tax should always be those who benefit from the service should be able to pay, and they should be able to pay to the level of tune of the benefit they receive. But the other aspect of it, those who cause harm should also be challenged to do that. Here I have in mind, for instance, environment. We should now start looking at those who cause harm to our environment. How do we tax them? Because then that can arrest also, the climate change that is a threat to all of us. So we should start thinking of tax that has to have those elements. But here is also an opportunity, because a country like Kenya now, we should start thinking of the opportunity we have to go green technology. And so expanding our economy is extremely important. And so that the element of not only discouraging consumption of some of those goods or getting penalty on those that cause harm to us, but also encouraging innovation in terms of technology and so forth. A second one, of course, is education, which I've talked about, particularly for the public. And the third one is vigilance. And the fourth one is investment and governance, making sure that the revenue that is collected is used to the maximum benefit of the economy, because the government expenditure is vital in stimulating the economy. I thank you so much. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for that keynote, setting the tone, but also giving us a few recommendations that we could use. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like now to jump into that very question of what is the role of professional bodies in enhancing domestic revenue mobilization. To moderate this session is Mr. Muriithi Ndegwa, Chief Executive Officer at the Kenya Institute of Management. Round of applause, please. On his panel, we will have Dr. Samuel Oroko, Chairman, Kenya Medical Practitioners and Dentists Union. Ms. Faith Waigwa, Vice President, Law Society of Kenya. CPA Murage Dominic. He's here. Should I say, representing the University of Nairobi, he's sitting here representing this very institution. Also, we have CPA Francis Kamau, representing ISPAC. We also have Mr. Keith Angel, Chief Executive Officer, South Africa Institute of Tax Professionals. We also have Evans Kakai, Board Member, Kenya Revenue Authority. And obviously the Ambassador. Great. Over to you, Mr. Muriithi.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Mr. Mwencha, for the very well thought discussion that you've led us on. And just to pick up on what Mr. Mwencha has said, he's mentioned a couple of things. And I'll just simply give an overrun, and then after that we'll pose questions to our panelists here. One of the things that he mentioned is about failure to negotiate agreements well, especially in negotiations for extractive industries. He also talked about the problem of taxation, that taxation should be made to respond to the economic process. He mentioned something to do with the tax process should also be made simpler, and he mentioned specifically about the online payments, where he talked about his ability to pay for taxes even while he was at Addis. I met him a couple of years ago in Addis, and he was doing a good job for this country. And then providing education to members on paying taxes. And he went on to suggest 5 proposals. One is, as professionals, there is also the issue of innovation. He talked about that tax should have an element of perhaps those who are messing up with the environment, and perhaps also what people call the sin tax and so on the other side of the equation. And he talked about education of public, and then vigilance, and investments and governance. Now, in the next couple of minutes, I'll want to engage the panel on specific areas, and so I'm going to pose questions to you, if you allow me, and then you can expound based on your professional area, and also based on what Mr. Mwencha has said. But let's start from the University of Nairobi. we have CPA Dominic Murage. As professionals, or professionals are products of the education system that they go through. And it's therefore imperative that during their later formative years of education in university, students or young professionals are be taught and it be inculcated into them the values of good citizenship, which amongst should be paying taxes. And the question to you is, to what extent does this happen in our education system presently, if at all it's happening? And the second question to this is that, is it sufficient? And thirdly, what more needs to be done? You can use this one.
Thank you, Pana Ndegwa. Yeah, from academic point of view, I think the education part of it, the tax education has not really gotten root in our country, since you find that it is only done, like even in universities, it's only done like, it's only offered to those students who are interested or who are in finance area, which I think is a big, there's an issue there, there's a gap. Because we interact with the tax, all of us, be it in education, every sector of the society. There's somebody who mentioned in the morning session that we need to start at early age, be it primary schools, secondary schools, to start inculcating this culture of paying tax. Because tax is part of us. We need tax so that we can develop. We can't have a civilized society where we are not paying taxes. And if we are to form this culture and the morale we are talking about in the morning of paying taxes, it has to be part of our education system. So far, it's not. And maybe something KRI, the Ministry of Education, Treasury, they need to think so that if you ask me, like in the university education, we need to make it compulsory so that every other institution of higher learning, at least that is being offered as a compulsory course in our higher education system. We also need to think more on, because tax is an issue more to do with the culture, especially when you talk of those who want to evade. Our media, and I know you have media guys here. What do we show our people every other day? What do we highlight? Because you will agree with me, the media normally, they set the pace of what we are going to discuss as a country. What is the media is what is the discourse which will carry the day. So we may want also to engage the media, the KRI, engage more with the media so that if we have people who have been caught cheating on tax, that should be the headline. That should be a topic which need to be taken up so that nobody would want to be caught like they want to evade tax. The other issue related to that is because you must be able to show people the taxes which they are paying, they are also assisting them. And there are some issues to do with tax incentives. Every other country, especially in Africa, is like they are so much geared to issuing tax incentives, and nobody comes back and look at the tax expenditure on the tax incentive. Because we give out billions of shillings every year, which these monies are monies which should have come to the local economy, but it's gotten there out. Nobody reports. I was doing some research, and I only show, I think it's only South Africa, where you are able to see how much in a year the government has spent on tax expenditure. And this tax expenditure, I mean on tax incentives. So I think it's a component which also we need to bring it out so that we can start having that discourse. Do we really need all these tax incentives? And how much are they costing us as a country? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to Dr. Samuel Oroko. You are the Kenya Medical Practitioners and Dentist Union chairman. Fine. Now, you must have gone through this same education system that we are talking about. And as a former student of the same education system that we are talking about, and a medical practitioner, and then now a unionist, perhaps you could tell us what role these institutions have played in ensuring stakeholders are citizens in good standing as far as tax matters are concerned, and also whether it's sufficient and what more needs to be done.
Thank you, Ndewa. Let me start by saying that medical doctors are the most naive people when it comes to money. They're good in management of patients to make sure you are okay and you're alive. But when it comes to management of money, we're the most naive. And this I've seen it because over the years I've seen a number of medical practitioners having their private clinics closed by KRA officers when they come around to check who's not paid tax for the last 10 years. So they are being given invoices amounting to 15 million, 10 million, and they end up closing clinics. Not that they do not want to pay, is because they do not know how to do it. And as you've said, if I begin from the education system, I was in this university. There's nowhere all through my training I was told about money, I was told about payment of tax. So when you get the program and you are doing your internship, after 1 year, you hear rumors that there is requirement of submission of tax. You also hear rumors there is a P9 form. And you have never seen a payslip in the first place. You have worked, you have been earning money. You have never seen a payslip. So somebody tells you go to online system, something we call Grace, and obtain your P9 form there. You don't know what that is, so you struggle around. So you hear rumors that you go to that office in town, there is somebody in the cyber will assist you submit. You go there, you are told to give 10,000 Kenyan shillings by some scrupulous people around. So you give your money and then they do some maneuvers and they tell you, we have submitted your tax returns for the year, now you're okay. So you're not sure if you're okay or you're not okay. So after some months, I have a number of colleagues who have been slapped with fines from KRA because somebody told them, we have done your returns, now everything is okay. 3 months down the line, they are told you have never submitted your tax returns and you're supposed to pay fines. So then how do we come in as the professionals body, and we are representing all medical practitioners, pharmacists and dentists in this country? There are many ways we can partner with KRA. One is in education to our members, the doctors. One, you can capture them at the point of entry to the market system. When we finish medical school, we go for internship. So before internship, we can partner with KRA so that we can hold workshops for doctors who are about to join internship, and they are taken through the process of tax payments. So as they begin to earn, they understand how to submit their taxes. Also, we can have a memorandum of understanding between KMBD, for example, and KRA, which then can look at various areas we can partner in training of doctors who are already in service. We do have what we call continuous medical education for doctors in different disciplines, almost happening every week all over the country. So we can have KRA coming on board during this continuous medical education, be given a slot, maybe 20 minutes or half an hour, and you talk about tax payment, how people are supposed to make their returns. We also have a number of private hospitals who are employing doctors. So if we have this MOU, then before these private hospitals get their renewal of practice licenses for their facilities, they need to produce a certificate of tax compliance from KRA before their licenses are renewed. That can only happen when we have close working relationship between KRA and us, so that this is fast-tracked and you have your revenues paid. Because I will tell you, a number of hospitals employ doctors on what we call locum basis. That is a part-time private practice. When they pay them, they're supposed to remit to KRA a given percentage, withholding tax. But the reality is they don't. How do you ensure they do? By partnering with these professionals in the medical field. And also, I was looking at the IMF report of 2010. They are talking about making tax systems which are more inclusive and efficient. Many times, doctors feel like they are being punished to pay tax. Why? Because over time, we have not had engagement where we feel inclusive in how all this system is designed. So here we have these partnerships, then we can disseminate the same information to our members, and they'll pay it without feeling the pain. Ambassador talked about when people pay tax, they need to see what it's doing for them. This also comment that the government needs to invest more in health sector, because in the budget declaration of 2001, it was very clear that every country needs to invest at least 15% of the GDP to healthcare, to spark growth in health, so that you can have more employment of healthcare workers, to pay more taxes to KRA. Then you need to invest more in healthcare to spark growth and expand the tax net in that particular sector. Finally, in my comments, at the end of every financial year, we do have difficulties amongst our members to pay tax. In this MOU, also you could agree that KRA can give us a number of officers who can help our members submit their tax at the end of every financial year, because we have majority of them going to some brokers and they pay a lot of money, 20,000 shillings, 50, just to submit the tax returns to KRA, which becomes a big problem. So this can be done, I think, if we have proper partnerships. Otherwise, I want to appreciate KRA for remembering professionals in this forum. And I will tell you that if you partner with us, we are very obedient. Doctors are the most honest people in the world. And if we have the information, we'll always do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuel. There is a lot more professionals that you're going to listen to. Allow me now to ask this question to CPA Francis Kamau. And as a corporate leader in a profession that is very critical, especially in aiding tax administrators to do their work effectively, what role has ISPAC and your membership played in achieving this goal? And the second question is, what are the challenges and what could be done to achieve more with less concerns, as concerns to helping KRA arrest non-compliance and also expand the tax base?
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. I represent ISPAC. I'm Francis Kamau. And the first thing is the role of ISPAC, or the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya. There are many areas which you are playing to ensure that mobilization of revenue collection becomes a reality. But having said that, I'll just highlight a few of them. One of them is regulation. And as you know, in this particular country, we have rogue businessmen, we have rogue professionals, we have rogue revenue collectors. So from where we are seated, as the institute, we have a code of ethics to ensure that our professionals, accountants, are basically well regulated. They are punished whenever they go through the route of being rogue, and at the same time, we manage to work collectively with Kenya Revenue Authority. Ready to mention that every month we meet with Kenya Revenue Authority, and we have discussed various modalities of reporting, of even changing the legislation to ensure that those particular people who are going astray from the institute are actually caught and punished accordingly. The other one, which I need to mention as a role, is the review of registration and policy making. And having said that, just give an example that we have a new income tax bill that is being mooted, out of which maybe in 2 years or 1 year, it's going to be the law of the land, because the income tax we are using is for 1974, so 40 plus years old. As an institute, we have actually come up with a policy, a draft policy, which we have presented actually to Kenya Revenue Authority, to the Treasury, and they are looking for some of the areas I need to mention, not in detail because of time, but just to highlight. One of them we are telling them is single identifier. For example, if you go to countries like Germany, they have what they call social security number. Come to Kenya. Francis Kamau, who works with Ernst & Young, has an ID number, NHIF number, NSSF number. Which other numbers do I have? They're about 10 numbers. And that means I can register business using all those particular numbers, and Kenya Revenue Authority, you will never get me. So that is the first issue we are talking about, the policy. And as professionals, we assure government, actually you can do more than you're doing by ensuring that when I'm born, I'm actually registered. Actually, the issue of registration of persons and business should be transferred to KRA, like other countries, where you're able to get the person from the time you are born to the time you die, and your activities, and you're able to match your business activities to you as an individual. The other one, moderator, without taking a lot of time, is expanding the tax base, whereby the blue chip companies, we have Kenya Revenue Authority actually camping there. Whereas we have, for those who understand Kenya, businessmen who are making billions in some places like Eastleigh, in some places like Gikomba, so that some of the people, like Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, even have weeks of working towards those particular businesses which are not complying, and actually trying to get those particular crooks. But having said that, they have to work with the government. The other one is the e-government, electronic, that a transaction, moderator, for example, that is done at land's office, KRA might not know it happened, because they are not using technology. I think Mr. Mwecha has talked about the technology, like blockchain technology, which can be able to bring ethical behavior in terms of transaction, that even the land can be sold 10 times by one individual, and you're not able to capture that. Francis Kamau can actually disappear through the immigration department, and he has not paid tax, and KRA will not know I'm running away. Because when I'm going out of the country, I need to be caught. That I can't be able to build 3 flats using the county government, and KRA does not know how I built this. So e-government is very important. Still under policy, the last one is international best practice. I think Mr. Mwencha has mentioned some countries in Scandinavia, they are doing very well in that particular aspect. The other particular issue I need to mention is education and training, and Mr. Murage, CPO Murage has talked about education, so let me not repeat that. So to speak, we need to start the issue of taxation right from lower primary school. The challenges actually, I think I'll just summarize them to what I've talked about. That one of the things where you're not able to capture the activities of people and what they are doing, it's very, very hard to basically understand the nature of business which happen in this particular country. Because for those who are not Kenyans, how Kenyans do business, in the month of January, he is a professor in the university. In the month of February, he is selling maize. And in the month of March, he's basically dealing with camels. So how will you manage to get such a particular person, single business identifier or identifier, the issue of e-government, and all that particular traction? So there are many challenges which again emanate from the government itself in terms of reforming the tax law and what we are basically calling bureaucracy and other particular issues which come in terms of how we operate from a government perspective. The other particular challenge is the media, and I think CPO Morage has talked about media, that this event will let be highlighted the way a political process would have been attracted that particular instance, that it will pass as a very little coverage in the newspaper, and nobody will know it happened. After some 2 days, then you forget. But if I'm a politician and I say something, it runs for a whole month. So the other particular issue, which is lastly, moderator, is to basically address the issue of the concerns that the taxpayers have in terms of how easy is it for a fisherman in our town of Kisumu or Mombasa able to pay taxes. I know Kenya Revenue Authority has done a lot, but more needs to be done for specific pockets of businesses, that this particular person goes to the lake and disappears for 3 weeks. How easy is it? And that's what I'm trying to say. The associations, the business associations, need to be closer to Kenya Revenue Authority. That particular farmer who is doing tea in Muranga, how is he able to pay taxes, and maybe he is not learned. So thank you, moderator. That's a few remarks I wanted to make on the same.
Thank you very much. CPA Kamau, you've talked about international best practice, and I think at this point in time, let's bring on board Mr. Keith Angel, who is the CEO of South Africa Institute of Tax Professionals. Now, from our understanding, you come from a country that is classified as upper middle income country by the IMF, and it is reported, if I got it right, that the tax ratio is about 31.2% to the GDP, compared to Kenya, which is only about 18%. And Ambassador Mwencha actually talked about the challenges of developing countries like Kenya, where that ratio is very low. How has South Africa managed to rally its people, and especially professionals, to achieve such high levels of tax collection and compliance? What are the lessons for Kenya, and what are the challenges in South Africa compared to Kenya, and how would you propose that they be tackled? It's quite a mouthpiece, eh?
Yes, no, quite a question. Thank you. Good job speech there. I'm enjoying it. Very impressed by the doctor, by the way. That was quite a thing. Let me just say, I'm from the South African Institute of Taxation. We've got over about 10,000 members, about 8,000 seriously active ones. We have a large tax practitioner community in our space. But the first difference between Kenya and South Africa is the level of formalization of the economy. The bottom line is the bulk of our money is formal. And we have a large formal economy, and a formal economy and the revenue service do better. And one of the problems for revenue service is they don't know how to deal with an informal economy. And they spend too much time with the formal. So that's the difference why we've got about a 26% GDP ratio in tax, and you guys have 18. You're coming up. So that is not something the revenue service can easily fix. One of the problems for revenue service is that we often choose very high-tech solutions to low-tech problems. And you'll see this in Africa a lot. that we choose very complicated European-style taxes when the economy isn't ready for that. The Europeans in the world of 1600 and 1700 didn't worry about BEPS, okay? They didn't worry about digitalization of the economy. They used some very basic means and they got the revenue they needed. So you've got to be very careful not to keep using the European formulas to extend the tax base. And the tax base is an informal tax base, and one of the problems also for revenue authorities is they tend to have a British tradition. And the British tradition is I sit at my desk, and I'm an accountant, and I get a return, and I check it off and scratch it, and then I do another one, and I do another. And if the information doesn't come in from an inland revenue point of view, I don't do anything. So all those doctors out there, whoever's doing whatever they're doing, nobody is doing what we call forensic or a police-style audit, where they go out and they aggressively go out on their feet and they choose and do lifestyle audits and other kind of things. And there is a revenue official here, I think his name is Bob, if I remember correctly, but the Revenue Service in the United States is very good at trying to pick up the informal sector. But to be fair, US, Canada, Australia, Britain, all of them struggle with an informal sector. Sorry about that. All of them struggle with an informal sector. So that is the difference of the ratio. And that's something we have to really be cognizant of, and we need to spend a lot more time. Now, just going back to what is the second element of the point. There are taxpayers, there is the Revenue Service, and there are tax practitioners. They are mostly accountants, they are some lawyers. The first issue is, well, one, I'm not going to pay tax if I don't have to. So if the Revenue Service doesn't know how to go out and physically do what they need to do, you got a problem. Second thing is, to be fair, a lot of people, doctors. Why do doctors want to be tax lawyers? I don't see it. You're a doctor, that's a hard skill. That requires a lot of hours. And if you're a doctor, you're a laborer, you don't know anything about tax. So unless the tax system is very simple and filing is very simple, you're bound to have a lot of problems. You can't expect a business owner really to do their own taxes. Individuals, like employees and all of that, that's fine. So if you keep the system simple, and that was one thing the South African Revenue Service did very well. For individuals, they made very simple e-filing. There, they could do it themselves, or simple preparers can help them, and that helped a lot. And we have a system where you plug it online and you're done, and a lot of individuals who are just salaried workers can go on, and that makes a big difference. One of the most important things revenue officials can get is making sure your salaried workers are giving you tax. If you cannot get it from your salaried workers, trust me, you're not going to get it from your multinationals. That's where the bulk of your first round of money must come. The second thing is looking at the role of practitioners. And now, practitioners come in different classes, okay? I am a tax lawyer. There's only a small group of us. Most tax practitioners are Francis, right? Good man, you can trust this guy. And there are a lot of them. And the tax accountants are the bulk of the community. And then you have a number of tax preparers. Some of them just help you out on the returns, and some of them are less qualified than others. And the question is, who's filing those returns? So the doctor made a very good point. These guys come, you pay them, and then you think the work is done, and you never hear from them again. Now, that's not the kind of practitioners you want in the community. So one of the things that's very important in the profession is to treat the tax profession as a profession, and for people to realize that they are going to a professional, and if that professional fails them, that there will be some sort of penalty, not from KRA, but from the actual taxpayer. If I'm a doctor and I spend 10, and I don't know if shillings it is, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, maybe 50,000 shillings to do my return, and then I wake up one day and it hasn't been done, or now I'm in trouble with the KRA because it's late, that doctor should be able to take that practitioner to court. So one of the things that is important in his work in South Africa is we have a large practitioner community. Now, what I am impressed by Kenya is you have a school of tax. Most African countries don't even have a school of tax. So the other issue becomes is, are you doing education? So one, as a professional body, we need to regulate our practitioners so they're credible, they're honest. The second thing is education. And unfortunately, tax is never simple. I know we've in many speeches, it's about fairness, efficiency, and simplicity. I know no tax system in the world that's simple. Maybe it's not half bad. And the more lawyers like me get involved, the uglier it gets, and we just amend away. So I can promise you, your tax law will never get simpler. And even the new act that comes out, and I know, Francis, you're doing your job, I guarantee you it's not going to be simpler, which might be a good thing for you because you'll be able to get a job and you can be a professional and all that. So maybe that's wonderful. But education is extremely important. One, in the basic rules. Two, the other problem is you've got to be able to not just read the rules. A lot of times I see teaching, and it's about reading rules and memorizing words. Tax is math. You have to teach people to do the math, to crunch the numbers. Very important. And you actually have to go back on principles. Now, one of the issues I have is a lot of times people aren't teaching the principles of tax. So the principles of taxation is it should never harm the economy. Yes, rich people must pay more, right? Those doctors, they're coming after them because they're rich, so they're going to pay more. But you don't want to hurt the doctor's business. You want these guys to make money so they do well. It's fine to take a portion, but don't kill the business. One of the things I see oftentimes in tax systems is that people don't understand. The answer is, we just want more. If the KRA or SARS gets more, that must be fair. No, it's not. Businesses operate on a profit model. You don't go to work every day for free. You go to work to make money. If you're a doctor and it costs you $500,000 to run your business and you generate $600,000 in revenue, you've made $100,000 in profit. Only some of that should be taxed. Anything more puts you out of business. So you've got one of these things I noticed, these visuals. And one of the visuals, the KRA is speaking, and he's talking about the rental tax for renting, okay? And he starts talking about rental tax, and he says, we're going to tax you on your income. And then he shifts in the middle, and he says, I'm taxing you on your rental gross. And it's only 10%, so he didn't think he slipped up. 10% gross is not a good tax. Better 30% on profit, okay? Why? If you know anything about residential rental, your profits are only 2 or 3%. That's the only profit you get. So you might have generated $5,000 of rent, but your costs are $4,800. So you're generating $200 to $300 in profit, and the tax is 10% of the gross. It annihilates the gross. And you know what I'm going to do as a landlord? I'm not going to tell the KRA. And so what happens is revenue authorities choose simple methods of tax, and they choose a low number, but they forget the basics of tax, which is efficiency. And unfortunately, we do a lot of simplifying methods that damage businesses. And that's when businesses really get legitimately angry. But businesses are not all good. Not all those doctors don't, they know to pay tax, but they don't want to. And it's a mix of problems. So what, again, going back to what we do, what is very important in the middle is a profession of tax accountants, tax lawyers, and tax preparers. We want them to be well-trained, and we want them to have integrity. And if they are well-trained in their integrity, they need to represent the taxpayer when the KRA is unfair, but they also need to be auditors to say, look, we are also part of the system, and you need to do your share as well. So anyway, I think I better shut that off before I go further.
Thank you very much. One round of applause. I'll just speak where Keith left. And you talked about professionals need to be well-trained. They need to have integrity, etc., etc. And there's another learned friend in the house. And we'll pick the question from there with Ms. Faith Waigwa, who is the Vice President of the Law Society of Kenya. Members of LSK probably form one of the largest sources of professionals in tax advisory matters in Kenya. And the question would put to you is, what is your role in enhancing domestic revenue mobilization, especially among the corporations that you advise? And the second question is that it's often been said that most of the times tax advisors, and I think Keith mentioned that, sometimes facilitate tax compliance through tax avoidance as opposed to tax payments. How true is this in Kenya? And as far as LSK is concerned.
Thank you very much. A professional body like the Law Society of Kenya actually states certain standards, both ethical and technical, that its practitioners must operate within. Now, when we look at the ethical standards, the issues of integrity come in. A member who does not pay their taxes, then they have integrity issues. Sometime next year in February, we will be having our elections as a body. One of the components for you to be able to be nominated to run for office is that you must have a tax compliance certificate. Why are we doing this? Because we want to set a certain precedent for our members that for you to be able to come up for leadership, then you must be a person of high integrity, a person who pays their taxes, and a person who abides by the law. There are several ways which we have tried so far to partner with KRA to enhance revenue collection and mobilization. One of the things that KRA has done is to offer seminars where they even sponsor seminars for our members. And through this, there is civic education to our members. Because people believe that lawyers and numbers do not augur well. But it is not true. We still have tax practitioners within the legal fraternity. We do have the tax lawyers who purely practice tax law. The way we are moving as a country is that you will no longer be going to the same lawyer for everything. So you have to cut a niche for yourself as an individual, as a legal practitioner, for you to be able to render the best services that you can be able to render. So you're not a jack of all trade, where Faith is able to do constitutional law, tax law, criminal law. So we are trying as much as possible to have that particular education given to our members through KRA. The other thing is developing of policy and legal framework for revenue collection. We partner again with KRA, where our members sit in some of the committees. Like, I believe we have a member representing the Law Society at the ITAX, not ITAX, but the tax tribunal. We have members at the tax tribunal. We have members who are also involved with the income tax bill that is being discussed. So with this, we are able to know what does KRA want and how can the lawyers assist Kenya Revenue Authority in mobilizing revenue. The other thing we've realized is that with the 47 counties, there is no proper legal framework and policy in coming up with the county financial bills. An example is when Kiambu attempted to pass a county financial bill and the Judicial Review Court nullified it for being unconstitutional. It's perhaps because they did not engage, the law practitioners who practice tax law, and were not able also to incorporate the issue of public participation. So if you bring on board the Law Society of Kenya, we are able to guide you in a way that whatever bills that come up and they are passed into law, then the Law Society does not go to challenge them. Because we've had instances where we've challenged the ETR, we have also challenged the capital gain tax, and it's not because the lawyers don't want to pay tax. It's only how do you implement that particular law. It might not be easy for the lawyers to implement. An example with the capital gain tax, where it was twinned with payment of the stamp duty. And the argument was very simple. We want the sellers or the vendors to pay the capital gain tax, but allow them to pay after the transaction has taken place, because it is only at the completion stage that the entire purchase price is paid. So if you condemn somebody to paying that tax prior to them receiving the purchase price, then they don't have that money to pay that amount. So it's not like the lawyers don't want to pay taxes. We want to be law-abiding citizens. We want to be very good citizens. But let us have a discussion so that we are not looking at each other as an enemy. The other issue is that you will find that there are people who now want to get into the tax bracket, or they want to submit themselves to now start paying taxes. And they have not done that for a very long time. They are afraid of the penalties. And they feel that if they present themselves, then something is going to happen and their businesses will collapse. They are not aware that an arrangement can be made between them and KRA on how to pay the arrears, or if the Commissioner General can be able to waive the interest and all this. So it's something that can only be gotten if we keep on talking to one another. Pricing of the professional services rendered is something that also assists Kenya Revenue to collect taxes. This is because we are regulated by the remuneration order, the advocate's remuneration order. When you visit a lawyer, the kind of amount that they will charge you as professional fees or legal fees is stipulated. They are not supposed to go beyond a certain, below a certain threshold. It's actually an offense to what we call undercharging. That is a plus for Kenya Revenue Authority. If we are putting pressure on our members, you need to charge the bare minimum that is required and not below the minimum. Then it means, again, the VAT is going to be taxed on the professional fees, which is the bare minimum, and not undercutting. I've spoken about the civic education. Cultivating the concept of tax morale and consequently tax compliance. I think it's high time that we start appreciating those who comply in terms of paying taxes. An instance would be perhaps our society also recognizing certain law firms or certain individuals who are tax compliant. It gives an incentive, and there's that bit of people look at other people's behaviors and they emulate. When one feels appreciated, then you will find that the other lot wants to feel appreciated, and they will come within the tax bracket if you start appreciating these people. Use of technology. It's a plus that KRA is using technology. We can now file our returns on our desks, at our desks, through the computer. So it makes things very, very easy for the practitioner. Instead of going all the way to the offices of the KRA or having somebody outside your office as a legal practitioner, because again, you might not be understanding accounts. The basic accounts we understand is accounting for lawyers, and it's very basic. So the legal and tax law is something different, and it is elective in school. So not all lawyers studied tax law. It's quite elective. But accounting for lawyers is mandatory, and it's quite basic. It's just because we need to keep two accounts, an office account and a client's account. That's the basic we need to know, and how to operate those two accounts. But the tax bit of it is a different ballgame altogether. So you have to have an interest for you to understand it. Otherwise, you need to employ an accountant and an auditor, and some of the small law firms cannot afford, perhaps, to have that kind of manpower. So the issue of filing returns and paying the VATs and the taxes within time is important for our members to be educated on them. And if they can do it from the comfort of their offices, it's a big plus.
Thank you very much. Can you give a warm round of applause, please? Thank you, Faith. We now move on to Mr. Evans Kaikai, who is a board member of KRA, and perhaps we'll sum it up by answering a few questions and wrapping it up from KRA perspective. Tax administrators have often been accused, especially by professionals, of not investing in fostering good relationship with their customers, the taxpayer. And from a strategic point of view, how much does KRA invest in education? That has been mentioned across the board by all the speakers. So how much does KRA invest in as far as education is concerned? And the second question is KRA doing enough to manage risks around non-compliance, and how is it doing this?
Okay, thank you very much. To start off, let me appreciate the professionals who have actually presented. We seem to be reading from the same script because the challenges that we have been having with them, they appear to be very clear in their minds. So by way of responding to the few issues that have been raised here, let me also say that in the past few years, as an organization, I think for the last 4 years, the compliance rate was around 65%. We actually engaged in terms of coming up with a vision, which was for 5 years. And one of the issues that we wanted to address was actually to move the tax compliance from 65% to around 80 to 90% within 5 years. Now, recently we conducted a survey in terms of compliance performance across the sectors. What came out is exactly what the professionals have said, because it appeared like the most non-compliant sector is actually professional. Well, we wouldn't say that they do it intentionally. Like what Faith said, we have various categories of non-compliance. There's that sector which really does that because of ignorance, and there is that sector which does that because of some intentions which are never disclosed. Now, another very sad outcome is when we try to analyze those who are doing business with the county governments. The last 2 years, I think 2,600 professionals had done business with the county governments, but they hadn't paid, and actually they are not registered on iTax. So what the professionals are saying here really makes a lot of sense. And therefore, the issues which you have tried to address, they are exactly what we are going to propose as an organization in terms of addressing this non-compliance. You asked about the relationship with the stakeholders. For the last 2 years, actually, we also changed the vision of the organization, and we also changed the motto. It was actually changed to now enhancing the relationship with the customer. And we have given it a very strong emphasis in terms of customer satisfaction. In fact, we are doing that by making sure that we enhance our marketing department. For the last few years, you must have seen that we have been very vibrant, and we have tried to reach out to everyone, to the public. And indeed, the survey that was carried out, we are doing very well in terms of customer satisfaction. We have put everything in place. We have automated the entire system. I'm sure the last so many years, you could call KRA until the chicken goes home without having the phone picked. But now I'm sure anybody who has tried to interact with Kenya Revenue Authority, you must have witnessed that the system is moving very fast, and you are getting the attention that it deserves. So we, as a board, we have put a lot of emphasis in terms of making sure that this department is actually built strongly, because it is the face of the organization, and we do appreciate even the feedback that we are getting. How much are we investing in education? I can say that a very reasonable budget has actually been put towards education. There are so many schools which we have actually tax clubs where we go and interact. Actually, from the primary to university, we have tax clubs which we are actually tagging along in terms of education. We do visit them. We do interact with all of them in terms of taxpayer education. So even in other areas of involvement, we are trying to come up, like the lawyer said here, we are actually sponsoring a number of organizations for the purpose of attending their workshops and doing the training as far as tax is concerned. In terms of risks, yes, initially we used to have quite a number, but through automation, because our Vision 2018 addressed so much in terms of automating the organization, and I think we are almost at 80%. In fact, from the presentation that you had yesterday from the Commissioner of Customs, there is a system which will really be a game changer in terms of automating the customs operations. So we have done this, and even in terms of that single button information, the integration that is happening now has reached a very advanced stage. And very soon, in fact, maybe before the end of this year, the integration will be completed, and I'm sure the system will be very effective, and the risks will be addressed, because we are trying to make it non-human intervention, so that we remove that human interaction, and I'm sure this will also address the risks that come along with the human beings. So in terms of our desire, in enhancing our relationship with professionals, I would like to appreciate the comment from the doctor here. It will be a good thing as even professional bodies go ahead and put a tax compliance requirement in terms of registering their members. That will actually ensure that for a member to get a registration or a renewal, he should have actually complied with the Kenya Revenue Authority. And that should be also on an annual basis. I would also appreciate what the lawyer had actually commended in terms of being steadfast in contributing towards the law amendments. Any legal procedure that is being amended, I think the professionals should be part of the process, because they are rich of the information. It will even simplify the process, because once they give their input at the beginning, it will be easier even to implement. There is also some way in which professionals can actually help the Kenya Revenue Authority. They have a pool of members, and as I've just said, there are so many who are not registered with us. So what the professional bodies can do, they can actually go ahead and be sharing the list of their membership with the organization, with the KRA, so that it can help even to reach out, because we have come to understand there are those who actually want to pay the taxes, but they lack the information. So by way of sharing that list with the organization, it will make it easier for us even to interact and now go ahead and provide the education that is required. I would also say that as professional bodies, if they can also engage in terms of doing their sectorial analysis, so that they ascertain the tax exposures that affect their sectors. It can be a good thing, so that they keep on appraising their members, because sometimes laws change, but they get not to know how. I would also appreciate the fact that value for money really is a significant area that all professional bodies need to focus on. Because of late, the various questions that are coming up are revolving around, why should I pay tax? So we are also going around and telling everyone that we meet that it is important not only to spend, but also to justify the expenditure. If you are an architect, the supervision that you are providing for any project, you must always bear in mind that it is out of taxpayers' money. Therefore, you need to just be spot on in terms of the supervision that you are carrying out, because Kenyans will be very much encouraged to pay taxes if they feel that their taxes have been put in the right use. I would also think that the role which the professional bodies can play will also be to enhance the process of educating their members during the startup of their business. We are aware there are so many youth who start off their business without necessarily having understood what they are actually getting themselves into. The reason why businesses die mostly is because of starting on a wrong foot. You get along the way, carrying forward the little taxes which you would have actually paid at the right time, but because of the accumulation, not knowing exactly how to do it, you get yourself with a very huge liability that makes one actually get out of the business. So I can actually say that the professionals have been very clear, and we look forward into partnering with them in terms of the proposals that they have put up, and even the memorandum of understanding that we can have so that we can have these sectors moving forward. As far as ISPAC is concerned, I would suggest that in the event that it is established, there is conspiracy between the tax advisor and the taxpayer, I think let the portion of penalty be shared between the person advising and the member. So it can be maybe a measure, if you put in place, can help the organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kakai. Can we give him a round of applause, please? We are coming to the tail end of the program, of this discussion, but allow me just to quote something. In 2016, as Kenya Institute of Management, we did a survey, and this was based on our membership. And the whole aspect was about expanding the Kenyan tax base towards a self-reliant nation. And we surveyed amongst our membership, because we have a huge data bank, and coincidentally, exactly what the members here have been saying mirrors so much on what came out. One of them was complexity of business and corporate taxes in Kenya. They talked about the high tax rates. They also talked about the whole administration and monitoring system. They talked about utilization of the taxes once they have been collected by the tax administrator. They talked about the complexity of the regime. They talked about tax education, exactly what has been said. Now, in very quick succession, I'll ask the panelists, please give us 2 strategies only. Don't go beyond 2 in the interest of time so that we give the audience time to ask questions. What, in your view, are the possible strategies KRA can adopt to increase the tax base and improve compliance from your perspective? And if a proposal is mentioned, please give another one. Don't repeat the same one. We start at the far end with Keith. Microphone, please.
Okay, there you go. So there's too much technology for me. I think the strategy number 1 for the KRA is I think you've got to go after the mid-size informal businesses. And I think what you really need to do is focus on having a different set of people and a different set of strategies. And that would be not using accountants or lawyers, but forensic auditors and really a detective kind of personnel. The second is better use of third-party data, but really strategies that are completely different than return-based, where you're really looking, like police detectives, to go find that money, and it's got to be much more physical approach. And I recommend that just for Kenya, but frankly, all African countries across the board. The second element of it is, again, I think we have to increase the value of education, and it comes to the profession as well. So one of the issues about education is the university. We don't put enough resources at a university level. We don't have enough trade schools or professions. We need to have a lot more. We're relying too much on the KRA. You can't ask the KRA to be an education institution. That's simply too much. That's got to come from universities and professional associations.
Thank you. Next, please just restrict yourself to 2.
Thank you. First is Kenya Revenue Authority needs to work closer with the national government and county governments by ensuring that they capture the registrations of persons and businesses. Number 2, work on single identifier, working with the government and ensure that everybody has one identification from birth to death.
Thank you. Our lawyer, Faith?
Involve the professionals in every key decision that you're making so that we avoid conflict when it comes to implementing perhaps the policies and the laws governing revenue collection. Number two, we need to crack our heads hard and see, are there any incentives that can be given to the professionals? I know there are incentives that are given to agricultural sector, so it is for us, together with KRA, to crack our heads hard to find those incentives for our members.
Please jump, Mr. Kakai. He'll come later because he's an insider. He's from KRA. Let's hear the doctor.
Thank you. Number one, I think KRA, in partnership with all procurement officers in counties and national level, they should be able to capture the data of all the suppliers who have been given tenders to supply or to provide services to different institutions, be it private or government, so that at the point they have been paid, then they are followed to make sure they pay tax on the profits they have made from the tenders which they have been given by the county. Because you must be losing a lot of revenue on that end. People are paid, they disappear, they get their cut and never get them. Number two, KRA, in this partnership platform which we are talking about specifically for my members, that is the medical practitioners, pharmacists, the dentists, we do have what we call the annual various conferences or the AGMs in other fields. KRA should be a key partner in those annual functions because we do have a congregation of all doctors from all over Kenya. That is the best platform. Every year you should be coming to help educate our members continuously so that they can be tax compliant moving forward. Because even this, once you give them information, then they can go share with their colleagues back in the counties when they go to their stations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Let's move on to CPM Morage.
Thank you. One suggestion is KRI need to be more aggressive. Because I'm disturbed when Director Kakai tells us that they did a survey and around 600 professionals were not compliant. Because if you can't be able to get tax from professionals, how will you get from informal sector? People who are not even registered. Because it's very simple to me. And what I would, because I know KRI, they are always involved when it comes to tax registration. Instead of relying with the professional bodies to provide KRI with the list, the database, or even to ask their members to be tax compliant before they register, why can't we have it in law? That, because all these professional bodies are there by law. We just amend the law, and we ask every every professional body, before they renew their tax or their practicing certificate for members, they should be tax compliant. That is one. Second, I saw some inconsistencies in Company Act, where now they require anyone who is have like 50 million and below in terms of revenue are not supposed to be audited. We are saying that informal sector is where we have the hugest, the biggest in compliant level. Then at the same time, we passed a legislation the other day that if your revenue, your turnover is below 50 million, you're not supposed to be audited. There's some inconsistencies there. So I would like maybe KRI, you can also propose that we amend that so that everyone who is doing business, when they are filing tax, let them be audited by the professionals. Also, those are two.
Those are two. Thank you very much. Please give them a warm round of applause as we get Mr. Kakai to give the final remark. And please just make it 1 minute so that we give the audience a chance. And in the audience, I hope we have microphones for anybody who has a question. We do? Okay, fine.
Thank you very much. I think my comment will be to request all professionals to be the ambassadors of KRA, to walk the journey with KRA, because they command a big following. And once we are with them, we will be actually sorted. Our dream is to have a zero deficit budget, which they can actually help us to achieve. Secondly, for university, if you can do something to squeeze in your curriculum this tax education, it can be a good thing for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. They deserve a warm round of applause, don't they? Thank you very much. This has been a very engaging panelist, and we really appreciate it. We'll take 3, 4, 5 questions. And please, as you specify the question, indicate whom the question is directed to, and perhaps also indicate your name. And make the question short, precise, and crisp.
Okay, my name is Francis. For those who don't know me, I'm the CEO of Reef Limited. I'll go straight to the question. I think one of the things that you also need to do as KRA is try and get into untapped markets like the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises. These are markets that are untapped. So that will also help you in terms of increasing revenues to the KRA aspect. And the second point is I wanted also to find out if you can work out formalities in terms of, like, say, tapping into organizations like, say, the central organizations or trade union, the Association of Kenyan Manufacturers, Building and Construction Practitioners Board. Just get hold of this so that you can get their members to know their members who are not KRA compliance. On the final one is I would also want to find out whether you as KRA are also giving back to the society in terms of, like, helping centers and areas where we have, like, centers of children who are looking for ways, orphans and the likes. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, can I kindly request you just restrict ourselves to one question so that we can expand the base? So that question goes to Mr. Kakai, the KRA director. Is that so? Okay, next question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for giving me the floor. I don't have a question as such. I just have an observation which can lead to a proposal. I want to link this panel to the first panel on taxpayers' moral and governance. What we have noticed is that tax administrations concentrate more on the technical aspects of their work and neglect some basic functions that are very important for the perception the taxpayer has vis-a-vis the administration. I want to talk of a function like reception. They call it in French accueil. How do we receive taxpayers in our office? Most often than not, we keep people at the reception who are even unable to direct the taxpayers when they come to the different offices. It is very important that even this staff of this basic level should have some training, because it is very, very essential. The reception, the way users in the public service are received, it has a direct correlation with the perception that they have, whether the service is efficient or not. It is very, very important. I would want to appreciate also this particular panel on professional bodies. But I want to note that it would have been important beyond this to have maybe a representative from the NGO, from the non-governmental organization, because they serve as the mouthpiece and the ears of a good portion of the population. Most often what the NGOs say in terms of even whistleblowing, in terms of their instructions, are at times even followed more than government institutions. So it would have been better for us to have an idea of their own perception as far as the operations of KRA are carried out. And just to say that From this, we can understand that taxation too is a crossroad discipline. We have medical doctors, we have accountants, we have lawyers, but all of them have tax concerns. And it is very important that our tax professionals should have a basic knowledge of all disciplines. Because if you're a tax professional, you are called upon to deal with a lawyer, you are called upon to deal with a tourism promoter, you are called upon to deal with a transporter and all the like. So it's very, very important. The last but not the least, I was so surprised that most of the professional bodies here have one reproach to the Kenyan Revenue Authority, that they don't meet. They are not in relation. I mean, it's really surprising because that is an avenue to touch a good number of the Kenyan population as far as tax issues are concerned. So it will be necessary that every year, maybe at the beginning of the financial year, there should be some meeting between the Kenyan Revenue Authority and the different professional bodies to pass their message through them to take back to their members. And by so doing, they will serve as not only as taxpayers, but also proper ambassadors for the Kenyan Revenue Authority. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Now, the final question before we get the answers, we need to be a little gender sensitive. Let's give the mic to a lady.
There's a question here, sir. I've been given the chance.
Oh, you have the microphone already?
Yeah, already.
Okay, we'll take you and then we'll take the lady, and then we close for this session before we move on to the next one.
Okay, thank you. My name is Moses Mwangi. I'm an agriculture economist from Moi University. Mine is just a comment to the chairman of Kenya Medical Practitioners Dentist Union, Mr. Samuel Oroko. Recently, you had a strike which lasted for 100 days plus. So our concern as citizens is for those 100 days, we submitted our rental income tax, turnover tax. For those who are employed, they submitted their income tax. And we feel that the professional bodies have been propagating their self-interest at the expense of Kenyans. This is because that for those 100 days, there were some lives which were lost, and we were hearing about CBAs. An ordinary Kenyan doesn't know what a CBA is. So we are requesting for a more moderate approach in future. As you are requesting for your interest to be served, you should also look at the situation of Kenyans, and because we are still the taxpayers, and in that period we were still paying tax. The tax was not altered for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Final one, please give it to one of the ladies. Yes, there you go.
Sorry, thank you. My name is Desmond Atome, and I just had two questions, if you allow me. The first one was to the ISPAC representative, and I would like to put in a scenario form. Now, we have an auditor that helps a taxpayer that is absolutely clueless, because there are some informal sector guys that actually do pay taxes. Now, let's say that this auditor is rogue and never files for the guy. Then afterwards, KRA finds out and then slaps them with, let's say, 15 million, that you have to pay 15 million in penalties and due taxes. You say that you have regulations that can actually help taxpayers and auditors. Now, what regulation is put in place to ensure that an auditor, in where they go rogue, the taxpayer can actually be protected to ensure that they don't pay? Because at the end of the day, how are they going to be getting 15 million Kenya shillings to actually pay for taxes? Then I also have another one for all professional bodies. What responsibility are you taking to ensure that there's actually that you contribute to taxpayers? Because at the end of the day, it is not just the Kenya Revenue Authority's responsibility to ensure that our tax base is enhanced, but each and every one of you guys. You do have professionals, and it is also your duty to ensure that if you guys are having annual agreements, do you guys actually take the initiative to invite KRA there, or do you assume that it is their responsibility to do that? Sorry, so what responsibility do you take? Because at the end of the day, these taxes are going to be helping us meet our SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So a couple of questions. The first one goes to Mr. Kakai, KRA Director. I think there were 3 questions in one. Then straight after that, I don't know, maybe somebody might want to comment about the observations that were made by my brother here. And then after that, we go to Dr. Oroko. You have a heavy question from there. And then finally to Tesma on KRA ISPAC, and all professionals. Maybe all professionals, we can have comments by Law Society of Kenya, and also by the medical practitioners.
Thank you. Francis, you asked 3 questions. The first one was untapped market. I want to actually bring to your attention that the informal sector, including the SMEs, is actually top on the agenda of KRA. We have a robust program in terms of reaching out, because one of the things that we need to achieve is to expand the tax base to a certain number. So to do that, we have a program in place. In fact, we have already started mapping Nairobi itself, mapping the entire region, such that we can be able to reach out to every household. So in terms of reaching to those untapped markets, it's just a matter of time, and it is not going to take long. It will be addressed very, very soon. You also wanted to know in terms of how we are utilizing the third-party database. We have another yet very, very enhanced program in terms of collaboration with these other institutions. I think we have already signed some few memorandums, and we will be finishing. I think NHIF is our concern, Ministry of Lands, Kenya Power. We are actually reaching out on integrating our system. The problem that we are currently having is that we appear to be ahead of every other institution in terms of automation. But we will try to make sure that the little integration that we can have, we will get access, because we know that is where data lies. And we reach out to them, we'll be able to get all the information that we need. As my friend from ISPAC said, that single identifier. We want to synchronize everything so that we can be able to reach out on all those. CSR, KRA invests quite a lot in terms of giving back to the society. In fact, we have been carrying out so many activities in the last few years, and indeed, that is why we have maybe been perceived to be doing very well in terms of customer satisfaction. So we have invested quite a lot in terms of giving back to the community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me begin by saying that when you look at trade union movement all over the world, they have a role they play in society. And the role is to keep the government in check and ensure that the people get the services they require. It can be due, as you have rightfully said, is a trade union which represents all medical practitioners, pharmacists and dentists in Kenya. And it's true we were on strike for 100 days. And it's true that I'm one of the people who slept in jail for 2 days during the strike. The whole purpose, I feel the suffering that was borne by Kenyans, and there's not really a wish that we do that. However, I just said about increased investments in healthcare in this country. As a matter of fact, Kenya has been revising downwards the allocation of revenue to healthcare. And many times the economists look at sectors in terms of how much the sector is producing before they allocate the resources. Health sector, as much as it's a consuming sector, is a service industry. If you look at it, it contributes indirectly to the growth of the economy. Because we don't make profits, but we ensure that the population, people, are of good health to go to offices, to go to the fields, to produce, so the economy can grow. If the whole population was sick, if everybody was in the hospital bed, we would be in the field producing. But in terms of allocation, healthcare is given little because we are always told, how much have you brought on into the basket? So our campaign during the 100 days was to tell the government to increase allocation to healthcare, to invest more in healthcare, to employ more doctors so that they can pay more taxes, KRA to get more revenue. was to tell government to equip the facilities so that the patients can go and get service. Was tell the government to train more specialists so that they can take care of the population. That was the whole campaign. It was never about our selfish interest, as you put it. So I think it's good for me to clarify. And the CBA simply means collective bargaining agreement, which is a legal tool that ensures constructive engagement between the government and a trade union representing workers in that particular country. The second question from that lady, our responsibility, how we can help KRA to collect more revenue. I think I want to begin by saying that today we want to play that role, and I'm inviting KRA to our annual Dailies Conference next year in May, so that they come there, and we'll be having a congregation of many doctors, almost 2,000 doctors from all over the country, who are officials and members. So in that function, come and give this information to these practitioners, and they'll be able to be ambassadors when they go back to the counties at their various workstations. I'll close by saying this. Many times, I know in the book of Hosea 8, it says that my people perish due to lack of knowledge. I will say, many times you may think that doctors or the professionals do not want to pay tax, but they do not know how to do it. And I think the more platforms we have with KRA, then the more informed these professionals can be, and then the more revenue you can collect from the professionals. So don't just curse these people. Understand us, be patient with us, give us more platforms, let's engage, even involve us in those board meetings which you discuss. We never understand what is discussed there, because actually I don't think there's anybody from our medical bodies who sits in those boards. So let's engage more, let's be flexible in engagements, and then we can collect more revenue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. We now move on to the final question, which was asked, I think, by Tesma. And she asked about the professional, what the professional bodies can do, your responsibility in enhancing the tax base. So a quick remarks from ISPAC and then from LSK, and we close it up.
Thank you very much. So the question was about an auditor, basically around the issue of ethics, and what auditors do. They actually provide assurance that the financial statements are fairly stated. And in case that particular aspect is not addressed during the execution of their work, there are specific steps that are taken by various bodies. Number one, from an ISPAC perspective, we have what we call a disciplinary committee, which has always disciplined accountants. Some of their firms have actually been registered. Some of them have basically been held to courts on those particular bases. Then we have other bodies like Capital Markets Authority. It has actually fined various accountants on cases where they don't do their work as stated in terms of providing assurances on true and fair view. But having said that, we also have another area where my colleague from legal profession comes in, that the taxpayer or the client has a leeway to take the auditor to court in case there is a mismatch in terms of what actually is provided. But having said that, remember the statement of true and fair view does not actually extend to complex scenarios. For example, I have a transfer pricing scenario in my books, and the Kenya Revenue Authority comes and discovers there is such particular issue, the auditor is not responsible for that, because that is now requires a professional on international taxes. And of course, that particular is a specialized, that particular is a specialized. So the person who can be actually be taken on from a disciplinary perspective is a tax professional if he was engaged by the taxpayer. So those are the measures that have been taken in place to ensure that the auditor does his work, and in case he goes against what is within the ethics, he is punished accordingly.
Thank you.
What can LSK do to increase the tax base in terms of their members paying taxes? It's continuous engagement, education of our members as to why it is important to pay these taxes, and also to hold the government accountable to exactly demystify how they use the taxes. Because if a member or our members are not seeing the value of paying taxes, then the tax evasion and tax avoidance becomes a rampant issue. But if we keep on educating them, like I said, we are not so good in mathematics, and tax is part of maths. If we keep on educating our members and reminding them in our seminars, we normally hold around 47 or 48 seminars in a year. You could have even 10 seminars on tax law and why it is important to pay taxes. We always have 3 induction courses for the young lawyers who've just been newly admitted to the bar. Perhaps one of the component of the induction courses should be the importance of paying taxes and why they should start on a clean slate as new advocates. I think that's the best we can do for now. Unless the law is changed, I do not foresee a scenario where we can compel our members to furnish us with the tax compliance. For the simple reasons we are lawyers, we will question each and everything. We are willing to assist, but keep on engaging with us, and we will be able to move and develop our country much better.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we've come to the end of the discussion, so we'll not be able to take any other questions. I was privileged to moderate this distinguished panel, and I think they deserve a warm round of applause, don't they? We also need to appreciate Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, who gave us the keynote speech, and it is on the basis of that that we've been able to have the fruitful discussions. My name is Moreid Ndegwa, Executive Director and CEO KIM, and I was privileged to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moreid Ndegwa, and your panel, and it was very engaging to at least get also not just suggestions, but also commitments coming from some of these professional bodies that they're willing and interested in working this journey with a tax collector. Thank you very much. You may take your seats. As my panel takes their seat, I'd like just to point out very quick directions on how we'll go as we hope to bring this to a landing. We had one last session, which will start, is set to start in less than 5 minutes. Now, I know we've been sitting since morning, so this session will be much shorter than what we've been having. Is that okay? And I'm proposing to have the next session take all of 30 minutes, and then you'll be free to have coffee, and then we'll meet tomorrow. Is that okay? So are you willing to indulge me for 30 more minutes as we look at a very important conversation that will sum up what we've been having today? Is that okay? Fantastic. So we'll be looking at, it's actually going to take a different format. So it's a corporate culture, a corporate lecture, rather, that we'll be having in a moment. And once our keynote speaker will have 3 discussants to just share their thoughts, and then we'll bring it to a close. So very quickly, allow me to call on stage the participants of this next session, where we'll be looking at the question of digital economy, revenue opportunities and challenges. There was a question that was raised earlier on how do you track people operating in this whole new digital economic space. I'd like to call on stage my speaker and discussants as they come up so that I'm able to introduce them and we are able to have that conversation. So I'll suggest you take the seats in the middle area. Right. So let me do a very quick introduction, and then we'll be able to hit the road. So we'll be looking at, like I said, the question of, the whole digital question. And digital has been seen as the biggest opportunity, perhaps, starting from the conversations we had yesterday and even today. And it is great to see that there's a lot of work that has already been done, either by the KRA, private sector, and other players in this space, to try and encourage a digital culture in the things that we do. To guide us and to give a keynote speech on this will be Mr. Raul Flores Palacios. I know I've massacred your name. You'll have a chance to correct that. But Raul is a tax and government digital advisor for Microsoft Consulting Services, Mexico. Very quickly, allow me to introduce the discussants for this conversation. We will have Dr. Charity Wanjua from the IBM. Obviously, IBM is a big stakeholder in conversation on matters digital. Why did we stop clapping? Clapping is good, remember? Thank you very much. Also, we will hear from Madam Doris Akol. She gave us a very interesting and inspiring speech in the morning, and we were able to learn a lot from our Ugandan counterparts, so she'll be also sharing her thoughts on this. Madam Doris is a Commissioner General for the Uganda Revenue Authority. Thank you. Mr. Gareth Harrison, who is a tax director at the PwC, is also part of these conversations. And, we have to learn from the people who have already been taking part in this conversation, not just the conversation, but also leading some of these organizations, guiding us through. And we are very privileged to have Mr. Rishadi. Rishadi is a former Commissioner General for the Tanzanian Revenue Authority. So we have a lot of experience that will be coming in from the region, even as we guide this conversation. Round of applause, please. Great, fantastic. So let's get this on the road. Raul, the stage is yours, and a chance to correct how to pronounce your name.
It is fine, Raul. Let me see if I can have some projection here. Sorry? Okay. So, in the meantime, I would like to start saying that when you talk about digital economy, that is the topic of the discussion that we are going to try to do it. We are on the middle of allowing to rest you. So I hope it's not going to be a hard session for you. But the concept that is behind digital economy is the concept of digital transformation. And what I would like to touch is just some very simple scenarios of what is a digital economy in terms of two figures. One is young people, such as Samuel Atieno. Imagine that Samuel Atieno could be, for some of you, like your son. And the idea is that thinking in terms of the tax authority, how can we enable the taxpayer of the future that could be this guy? And consider this guy as I mentioned to you, could be your son. This young student is normally he uses a lot of technology
for his daily life activities. As you can see on the screen, he's basically a person that uses technology for running his studies. He used technology for getting content online. He is very comfortable using technology for interacting with other people. Is a person that basically born as a consumer that is using technology all the time. Technology is something that is common for these people. And the idea here is what the digital economy and what the tax authorities are doing in order to enable not the taxpayer that we face today, but the taxpayer for the future. That is one concept. Now, let's think in Gladys. Gladys is a business entrepreneur. He's a person that basically is implementing a business. He's selling and buying online goods and services. That is one concept. She's using Amazon. She's using eBay. Actually, she's using Fiverr, for instance, for hiring professional services outside of the country. She saw it is not needed to hire services in the country. They can hire as a service in China, in India. They can do it any place in the world. She's also using online payment gateways. She's using PayPal for the goods and services she's selling. Then she's reluctant to own assets. She's a person that, because of his age, she likes to use basically shared services, such as Uber, okay? She doesn't like to own the asset. They like to share the services. Also, he's marketing in Facebook and YouTube. He's not using the traditional mechanisms, but she's basically marketing online. The other concept is she's providing a service that has born on the cloud, okay? The cloud, basically all the business model is enabled on the cloud. That means that there are no assets in the country and that there are no boundaries in terms of where the services are located. And the challenge here is those assets that are basically shared services could be located in any place in the world, okay? If you think where those clouds are located, you are going to know something for sure, that is not here, okay? So that is another concept. Then she's planning to use drones for delivery. That is something that is happening in some countries. So instead of running the traditional delivery, she's planning to use drones. Then she's hiring people using LinkedIn. And finally, he's planning to provide customer assistance using a bot. All the process is digitalized and all the interactions are digitalized. So now, if you think in terms of taxes, what are the challenges for the tax authorities to face this kind of operations that are quite common in the new digital economy? And here, we are basically facing the challenge in how we enable technology for the people. Years ago, if you think when the internet born, it was basically in the late 60s, early 70s, and it was a project that born in the military industry, in the government, and the model to enable technology to people was basically the idea that the government, the military, they create technology, then the corporations adopt the technology, and finally, then users, the people, use that technology. But that happens when we started adopting the internet. The idea of the digital economy today is that the people is consuming technology. They are consumers before they are taxpayers. So the businesses are developing new business models because they are facing people that is using technology since they are quite young, as I mentioned with Samuel, the scenario with Samuel. So the model today is quite different. There is no anymore the case when the government is defining what is the kind of technology that the people is going to use. What is happening today is that the way that the people is consuming services is what is defining the way that the new organizations are providing services to citizens. That, as I mentioned to you, those citizens are first of all consumers, then they are taxpayers. And one concept that in this new digital world, what could be some ideas that the tax authorities can use in order to adopt the digital economy and can use in order to transform and to digitalize the revenue, the tax collection and revenue management model. And I included here 5 concepts that are quite suitable for economies such as the one of Kenya, so the economies that are mostly in our developing countries, that I put some facts on the right, and just to share with you some of them, these economies used to face a big rate of tax evasion. I understand that the tax evasion rate in Kenya is almost 50%. In some of these countries, developing economies, is in the range of 30 to 50%. So that is a challenge. The other thing is there is a strong dependency of some specific taxes, such as the value-added tax. And there are, those tax authorities are discovering that the best way to engage with the taxpayers is transforming the business model that they use to interact with the people. And the 5 pillars for enabling that digital transformations are basically the idea to transform the entire tributary model, to enable the concept of the taxpayer of the future. And the idea here is to think and to develop services, not for the taxpayer that we are facing today, but for the taxpayer that we are going to face in the next years. The tax authority is basically the data engine of the country, because we are collecting a lot of data. If the country start adopting some services, such as electronic invoicing, you will discover that the 95% of the data that you are going to collect coming from commercial operations is going to be precisely data from those kind of transactions. And the 5% is going to be the data that is coming from voluntary tax compliant processes. So the idea of adopting a data culture is critical. The other thing is, once the tax authority realizes the importance of data, it is needed to collaborate with other entities in the government and in the private sector, because we need more data. We need to know what are the properties of the taxpayers. We know what they need, what they are doing in those interactions, such as the one that I described with Gladys. And finally, we need to enable a value change in the entire tributary cycle. It is not just the duty of the tax authority to enable the tributary model, but we also need some value-added services on the private sector, so they can provide additional services, such as electronic invoicing, where they can provide, for instance, accounting, or they can integrate the fiscal accounting to the ERPs of the medium and large corporations, or we can enable basic accounting for the small companies. And the last concept that I will introduce, what are the technologies that enable the digital transformation for tax authorities? Basically, it is the capability to use or to develop a tax intelligence model, because we need to detect advanced scenarios for simulating operations in the economy. We need to detect advanced scenarios for preventing frauds, for detecting anomalies. So it is needed advanced analytics in the sense of enabling tax intelligence. The other concept is we need to start doing real-time auditing instead of just the traditional auditing. So when the taxpayer is, for instance, acquiring an asset and he's not complying with his taxes, I can detect that he has a debt with the government, but at the same time, he is purchasing, for instance, an airplane. And I know because I immediately detect the commercial operation. I am using bots to enable a more efficient way to interact with the taxpayers and to reduce and to provide an effective assistance to the people instead of having a call center, for instance, or a support center that is basically dependent on human interactions. We can standardize the way that the tax authority provides support using a bot that is using also artificial intelligence. I am transforming the model of interacting with people. And finally, it is a matter of enabling a better user experience. Just the kind of user experience that you use to interact with the applications that you have in your mobiles. And it is not the idea of having a mobile application, it is the idea of changing the way that we engage with the taxpayers, that they discover that it is really easy to comply because I am able to pre-fill a tax form and completely, and that I can submit my tax form in maybe 3 minutes, and I can apply for my refund in in a short period of time, maybe 2 days, 3 days, but that is the kind of services that we need to enable. So these are the concepts that I would like to introduce to the panel, and maybe we can have some discussion.
Right. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Raul, for setting the stage for us. I think the first discussant to just share your thoughts and probably react to this, and coming from IBM, I'm sure you have a lot to say about data and how to incorporate. But as you react and give us your thoughts, also just consider the question of how then do we make it a lot easier for organizations such as the KRA and many others to incorporate some of the tools that you're putting out.
All right, thank you.
Feel free to sit. I think it's better if you're all seated.
Okay,
great.
Perfect. Thank you, Raul, for very insightful remarks. I think, none of us needs to be convinced on the opportunity that lies with digitization or the digital economy. What maybe I would like to share is just a few thoughts around how to, or at least how we think about it, and how to structure all this opportunity into some way that we can start to take advantage of it in, depending on where we are as a country. So when I think about the opportunity for digital transformation, it's really thinking about from the perspective of the taxpayer, from the perspective of the tax authority, and then from the perspective of the tax accountants who help taxpayers to be able to fulfill their obligations. And so I think about planning whatever you do in the digital space by starting to think about each of them a bit separately, but then later you can start to sort of put dots together. The second way I think about it is through thinking through the value chain of tax, payment, all the way from the identification of taxpayers to their registration, to how they file and pay, to how we ensure they have complied, etc. And so when I think about the way to drive digital transformation, for example, I think technology is just an enabler, but the starting place is to really identify what problems we see in whatever country. So, I think maybe a month or two ago we were in Uganda, and the conversation started from, do we know how many taxpayers we have versus how many we expect? And so once you start to define your problems that way, then technology just becomes an enabler where you have defined a problem and you're looking at a plethora of technologies and identifying which ones of those fit into the problem that you have. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I'm going to stop here. But the idea for me is to really start with identifying exactly what problems we have and looking at ourselves and saying, okay, are we, where in the value chain do we see the biggest return on investment? and then be able to identify those problems and work with people who know these kinds of technologies. I think the way to get the biggest, bang for your buck is to work with people who understand what the challenges are in great detail, and then you work with people who understand the technologies in great detail so that you can actually forge a relationship that allows you to address your challenges. So I think, in the way of utilizing artificial intelligence, analytics, I think most tax agencies are probably just there where there's a lot of data that has been collected, and perhaps the challenge is in being able to make sense of that data. And the good news is there are technologies to do that. I think, again, the problem is to start with identifying tangible problems and then be able to continue to grow with time.
Right. And I like what Dr. Ayua said. It's first identifying. We're all excited about the whole digital idea, but we don't know where to start. And Gareth, let me just bring you in as you share your thoughts. Obviously, it seems like going digital is a new game in town, but as PwC, are you happy with this new trend? Are you prepared for it? And how best can you empower your people, your staff, but also looking at the partnerships with organizations like the KRA?
Yeah, thanks very much. It's obviously an area that we're keen to work with our clients on. And I think one of the things that I would like to bring out is the challenges that some taxpayers are going to face, because the business models are changing. They're employing new technologies. The types of taxpayers that are in Kenya and internationally are different than has been in the past. So we need to acknowledge and understand those evolving business models. I think there's been a couple of references to the fact that it's not necessarily about taxing a digital economy as though that is a separate concept. It is about taxing economic activity that is delivered, perhaps electronically or on different platforms, digital platforms. Many of the transactions that take place are fundamentally the same transactions. There is a producer, there is a consumer. It's simply that the method by which the consumer consumes the product has radically changed in the last decade. So, for us as advisors to our clients, and for us as working with revenue authorities, we think that the key to successfully taxing is going to be around increased understanding. So the revenue authorities need to invest in understanding how business is changing and how business is evolving. And I think the second thing that they need to really work hard on is also evolving definitions. So tax legislation is updated from time to time, and it really needs to incorporate, definitions of technology and platforms and products, etc., that have not been covered in the past in legislation. So let's take blockchain and Bitcoin as an example. Clearly, you could look at it as though it is a currency, simply a currency. I have a dollar in my pocket, or I have a Bitcoin on my laptop, and there is a means by which I can the KRA could tax some exchange gain if I cash in my Bitcoin, or is it a tradable commodity? And so it's that kind of challenge that the revenue authorities need to face, because it's not going to go away. The technology is here to stay. The pace of change is rapid, and so really that enabling the discussion and the information to be available to the taxpayer to help them understand how they should go about taxing their businesses in this new environment is critical in order to be able to maximize tax revenue on these transactions.
Right. Let me just bring in Madam DG. From the Ugandan experience, and you've had Gareth talk about the fact that technology is not going to go away anytime soon. It's here to stay. What is the Ugandan experience, and as the person leading this effort of trying to tax economic activity in the digital space, what are some of the opportunity and challenges that you see?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Raul, for that very good presentation. indeed, when I look at Gladys, I believe she was, Gladys the entrepreneur, Gladys is the epitome of the thorn in the flesh of the tax administration of today. That's because Gladys is actively doing business, actively earning income, but in a manner that is so invisible for a traditional tax administration that's implementing a traditional or typical tax legislation. And Mr. Harrison has mentioned that already. And I'll give you some examples of why Gladys is a conundrum for us. Right now, the digital economy is looking at a growth in so-called non-monetary transactions, a transformation of what we typically see as the disappearance of money, value being exchanged without the actual payment of cash, that a traditional tax administration would be looking at as evidence of earning of income or indeed an economic transaction for purposes of taxation. That is one of the issues. The rise of virtual currencies, and we've talked about, Gary has talked about, Gareth has talked about the Bitcoin. Bitcoin and other virtual currencies, air miles, I don't know, these loyalty points on your supermarket cards, it's all money. It's all currency because you can actually exchange it for goods and services. But this is what a tax administration doesn't know what to do with. How do we deal with it in a scenario where the legislation only recognizes exchange of money as we know it now? The disappearance of a concept of a permanent establishment. Our legal regimes recognize that in order for one to be a taxpayer, you must have a physical presence somewhere. But just look at Gladys. Where is her physical presence? Either for her transactions, for delivery, for receiving of payment, and all those transactions that she's getting involved in, employment, where is her physical presence? So where is Gladys? In which jurisdiction is she a tax resident? And who's going to collect tax from Gladys? So the disappearance or the rendering irrelevant of a concept of a physical establishment or a permanent establishment or a physical place of abode is one of the issues that we must, as tax administrations, indeed, those that are dealing in reforming the tax legislation, we must look at. From the national perspective, because we are dealing with issues of attribution of profit, attribution of creation of value, and yet are struggling with all other jurisdictions on who should tax this particular person, there is an element of a threat to sovereignty, because tax is the biggest evidence of sovereignty that a country or a nation can exercise. But if because of the way the digital economy is manifesting, it is not possible to pin down which jurisdiction has a right to tax, that could also be interpreted as an erosion on sovereignty for purposes of taxation. And I think these are the realities that we have to face, even before we go into the use of technology in tax administration. As the people that are implementing the laws as they exist now, are they enabling us to be able to tap or harness the changes or the transformation that the digital economy presents with us? Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we bring in, thank you. Round of applause, please. Mr. Rashid, you've had a chance to lead the Tanzanian equivalent of the KRA, and obviously we are now grappling with this new concept of invisible money and attribution of profits. And before the Uganda Revenue Authority comes for my frequent flyer miles, we need to address the question of borderlessness that she's brought about and the threat to sovereignty. And just tying that to the fact, how does this threat then add impetus, if I may, to incidences of tax avoidance now that everything has moved digital, even as you react to some of the points that Raul brought up?
Okay, thank you very much. I think for me, on this topic, I usually look at it and try to wear two hats. One as a revenue authority, then you take out and wear as a consumer and see the opportunity that the digital economy can bring. And as a revenue authority, will always be tempted really to start seeing how you can tax such a new things that are coming. Although the digital economy is no longer new. It's been in the market for the first time I discussed this, I think about 20 years ago, when at that time we were talking of somebody buying a song over the internet. And you say, really, if you stop that and say you have to pay some taxes before you can actually get that song, you know, Africa wouldn't even matter. You tell Amazon to come and register here as a taxpayer for you to be able to access. He will really think twice. And he'll say, okay, we put a geo filter and Kenya's out. And that has happened so many times. The services, the kind of services like Netflix, they have been doing that. But I think the world is evolving. Even the biggest companies, they started small and then it becomes very big. But there are also certain services or products that are consumed by corporates. So in taxing, before we even actually talk about what we tax, whether product or service, we also need to see what exactly are we talking about when you talk about digital economy. And that's when you could really put barriers and say, okay, this one definitely we have to go for. This is probably we need to weigh out and give chance. A very good example is M-Pesa. We all saw when it started, but we said, you know, if we start putting tax before this thing become really important to the people, we will just deny the real people that we are supposed to use that digital economy. And now see where the M-Pesa is. If we tax it, probably wouldn't happen. Likewise, when Uber was starting, it was the same thing. But now Uber has become an opportunity. There were so many taxis which were operating without license, and the government was getting nothing. But Uber, because they saw the opportunity, they've registered, and the governments in Africa, they are now getting some money out of that. But when I look at it, I always try to put in two different parts. There is part of retail consumers and corporate consumers. Because if you ignore as well, the amount of money involved is huge. The large companies of the like of Microsoft, they are sitting with $1 trillion in Ireland. They cannot move it back to pay dividend there because they were following up the tax, you know, the lower tax rate. So they put there, but moving it back to US, they have to get to pay tax, and it becomes a big headache. So there are certain things that we also need to see. Recently, Google had to pay, I think, 300 million pounds to UK, and so forth. So there are certain areas, yes, we need to make sure that we are not being left out. But again, when we try to see how we tax those, we also need to see how practical that is. What services are we actually denying our people if we fight to try and tax? For instance, I'll tell you, nowadays, if you contract PwC, probably there will be only one person who will be actually doing that work in Kenya. The rest of 10 or 15 people will be outside Kenya working for the same service you want. So they will help you get a better product at a very fraction part of the cost. But if you demand to tax all of them in Kenya, and everybody in each country wants to tax them as well, you may find that you won't get that chance to utilize the expertise that is available across the world. So it is a very, very big balancing game. And I think the people who talked about base erosion and profit shifting yesterday, probably they would have been the best people to talk about this topic in detail when you talk about corporate, because I know when you talk about the apps each one of us is downloading from the mobile phones could not be significant. But when you talk about a software that the company can also acquire, or the cloud computing that a big corporate can acquire or can use, that service is a huge amount. And we are taxing. Some of this we are already taxing. We see the cost benefit. I'm sure in many countries around the region, we have a reverse VAT, we have withholding taxes for some of these services which are being offered on a cloud sort of environment. But it's all a question of how you balance. Because if you rush to tax, you may end up being denied that service. So it's something that we need to take it very, very carefully. The Bitcoin that people have been talking about, the other day I was reading, Zimbabwe is actually leading in Africa in terms of people who are buying Bitcoins. And the reason why, because the Zimbabwean, even with the application of US dollar there, the US dollar currency becomes so scarce in the market, but because there's still economic activity going on, people still create wealth. And the way to store that wealth is somewhere. So it became very popular there. And I'm sure if the restrictions were put there, yeah, somehow, somewhere, that money will have to be, because if there's economic activity, somehow, somewhere it has to find a way out. So for me, it's a matter of balance, because for us, many times we'll find that people are weighing the significance. Is it significant to go and register as a taxpayer in Kenya while you are operating globally? Probably not. And if they insist, just put a geo filter, block them, they don't participate, then you come up with so many other workaround. But because I'm not very expert on these things, I want to end up there. Thank you.
We actually have an expert in these things on the panel to save you. But before that, Raul, I'll just like your comment, especially having worked in a different jurisdiction. When you look at Africa and the conversations we're having now about leveraging on this whole digital opportunity, what, in your view, outside looking in, are low-hanging fruits that probably the KRA, the URA, or even the Tanzanian authority can leverage on?
You know, in my experience, what we can leverage is...
Microphone is off. Now it's on.
Sorry. Okay, what I think that we can leverage is, end of the day, if you see what the digital economy is causing is the lack of boundaries, right, between how the economy is acting. And that lack of boundaries is demanding for some kind of cooperation, and we can leverage some cooperation between the organizations in order to start sharing information and collaborating between the governments and also between the organizations that are making transactions. So that lack of boundaries is also, as we mentioned, making the taxpayers invisible. And that is a big issue that can only be controlled even with the collaboration with the big companies such as Amazon, or maybe with the big companies such as eBay. So I think that instead of blocking that kind of interactions in the economy, perhaps what we can leverage is, as you mentioned, is how can we move and to be part of the business model, so we can start I am thinking of issuing my electronic invoicing, that is a digital receipt in the transaction that I am
making in that operation. So those kind of things are basically one idea that I believe that tax authorities, and especially in some countries that are adopting technology, could leverage from those operations. I have another comment. This morning I was analyzing what is the penetration, not of the internet, but how the taxpayers are interacting in Kenya. And I was quite surprised that trying to understand how the taxpayers access the services of the tax authorities, you can access those services for sure online, but you can try to search for the service in Google, for instance, and the taxpayer, when they do not know what are the kind of services that they need to access for complying, they start Googling. There are some countries that are quite effective to provide the taxpayers with an effective service so they can access what you are offering. And I was surprised that Kenya is really effective on doing that. Just the 30% of the taxpayers are Googling. The 70% are connecting directly to iTax, are connecting directly to the services that are online. That means that people is engaged, that is they are online, that you can leverage that capability to connect. I also, when I was making the analysis, from the 10 top online services, 4 of them are government services. So the digitalization of the government is being effective in the country. And that is something that could be leveraged in order to collaborate, create international cooperation, and also to promote the online operation of the citizens and the taxpayers. That is my thinking.
Right, fantastic. Obviously, very practical ways of leveraging on the space that we are in now. I will allow just 2 questions to people who've not spoken the whole day. Just 2 questions, and then we come back to my panel for the closing comments. Do I see a hand? There's a hand there, and there's the lady here. Okay, let's start with the lady. Also, tell us who on the panel you'd like to address your question.
Ms. Stella Agara, I'm going to make one comment, which is also linked to the previous presentation, the previous panel, and a presentation that was made yesterday and some sentiments that were made by Raul yesterday. We are talking about digital businesses and the amount of information that the revenue authorities would have to deal with when they start accessing digital businesses and trying to reach out to digital businesses. I think as Kenya Revenue Authority, we must invest ourselves in making sure that we manage that information. We are doing badly in the sense that we do not even know which businesses are registered, and therefore they can stay a whole year and then be slapped with a fine, yet we are looking for information out there. So can we find a way of making sure that we organize ourselves in a manner that any information that is available to the governments, which I think Raul said effectively, the sectors should collaborate in government and share whatever data they have. So that a new business does not have to wait until a whole year is gone and then they're slapped with a fine when they could have very easily been able to get communication from KRA. Welcome to the tax platform. This is how you can engage. That's one. But number 2, and most important, Africa is losing a lot of resources to these digital business platforms, and our revenue authorities were never ready for the new business models. So the question we should be asking ourselves is, and I'm hoping that hopefully Richard, from your experience, or maybe Raul will be able to respond, what are some of the simple technology that we already have that we can take advantage of now to get as much as we can get paid off by some of these digital businesses? Ireland, Italy, the UK have successfully managed to get Google and Amazon to pay some money. What can we learn from them?
Right. Thank you very much for that. Do you go? Do you address them first? Because I think let's address them so that we don't lose out. So the first, Richard, you'd want, but I also like to hear Dr. Ayua because you are the techie seated here with us. Probably just before Raul, on the question of what are those basic, we keep talking about this whole digital divide and we're excited about it. But where do we start? Are there basic tools that we can use now? Like she said, first for the taxpayer and then for KRA to be able to leverage on this. And then the whole question of, can we get the monies that are out there?
All right, thank you. I think you've already begun to think about the first steps towards addressing, for example, digital businesses that are located here. And I think part of it is just being able to detect that they exist. And detecting they exist doesn't mean we detect them from when they pay they pay for pay their taxes. I think you start from all the way from registration, and I think we've done some things with company registration, for example, where you start to make sure that if someone is registering for a company, then you link that to their KRA PIN application, etc. And then what you're talking about, starting to incentivize or drive communication right from the day of registration. And there the technologies, I think, both organizations already have online systems. So here you're looking at starting to look at just things such as integration and then moving towards starting to create notification systems. So that I think that's very basic but extremely important and effective for a start. I think as you move from that, the other places are to start to think about how can you use third parties that these digital businesses are interacting with as a way for you to continue to detect them, but also to cross-check and understand the kinds of transactions that are happening. So at a very basic level, I think there is some information we can get from existing government agencies, but I think there's also ways for us to start to say, what do they do? Who are they interacting with? And how can we be a part of that interaction so that you can at least be able to detect what's happening? But also, I think the last part is to think about what incentives you can provide for them in whatever interaction they have, so that there's some excitement about being visible in some ways.
Okay, Raul will respond, and then for the incentives, I'll have Madam Doris respond because she's she has that problem at her doorstep right now. And also, Richard, you'll respond to that, so Raul.
One of the things that amazed me is that if you see the technology, as someone mentioned, has been there since many years ago. But the real challenge is the information that the tax authority has is amazing. But it's not the only source of information. If you see how the government works, there are different times when you need to provide the same kind of data as a citizen. When you go to not just to the tax authority, but if you are accessing a health service, you provide information to the health institution. So beyond the technology, my experience is that the first thing that is needed is to share the information between the government. So, for instance, if the health service understand the money that the employers are paying because of the health services they provide to the citizens, that is valuable information that you need to complement to the information that the tax authority has. And if you think, for instance, moving to the financial institutions, if you can share the information that the financial institution has or they have, you will understand what are the assets that they are contracting. So more than technology, I think that the challenge is the ability to cooperate, number one, between the government in the same country, number two, with the commercial sector in the country, and also with the large corporations. As you mentioned, UK is doing something, but it is not like, it is because they are forcing Amazon, eBay, in order to start, regulating what they are doing online. So forcing or collaborating, what is needed is a matter of sharing information, not because you want a big brother in the tax authority, but because you need information in order to enforce the tax regulation.
Right. And I think Raul said something very important, that the data the government collects through different agencies, through healthcare, it needs to be communicating with each other, right? Let's have Richard respond to the issues Stella raised, and then we'll have Madam Doris address, and then we'll take your question.
Okay, thank you very much. I think my response to that is not going to be very different from Raul there. The most important thing is collaboration. These are big companies. When you talk of Google, when you talk of PayPal, when you talk of Amazon, they operate globally. And slowly, even Africa becomes significant, especially now that the internet speed is very fast. We have got mobile phones, people all over the country use somehow, and even our corporate customers here do, instead of reinventing the wheel. For instance, if you go to pay television subscription, you find that they have hooked up with a PayPal. So they capitalize on these pre-existing technologies. So what is important is first understand the digital economy. And to understand that, you collaborate with these people to get the information. Once you get the information, you will be able to know, are you insignificant or are you significant? Are you going to, are you growing into a significant portion? Because there is no anyone in the world who wants to operate and want to antagonize the government. So when you invite the collaboration, they will give you all the information, and you'll be able to synthesize. You'll be able to see whether your tax laws really cover that, or you need to change your tax laws to accommodate when you see that it's clearly something that needs to be taxed and is not taxed now because of the technology. So you'll be able to judge there, and then you will be able now to work with those global players, or rather the technology players, to be able to introduce the taxation, and they will comply, because the non-compliant is so significant to them. Uber today has messed up some few countries. They're suffering big time. But they know that they have to comply, provided that the compliance is something which is achievable. Right. If you force all of them to be taxpayers of the world by force of registering TIN number in each and every jurisdiction they operate, sometimes they don't even know until when you ask. So Kenya is already making a very positive move, is a member of Global Forum. In the Global Forum, there's a country-by-country reporting. So all these people, they will reach a point where they will be reporting their income country by country. So you could easily take such kind of report and say, okay, is my legislation allow me to ask for my piece? Mm-hmm. And that's how you can deal with that. But we should not feel like we are all at loss here. We're not. Already we are getting quite a sizable chunk of revenue from the digital economy. As I said, when you look at the corporate side, the maintenance of databases, which most of the corporates have here, are being done remotely. And when you talk of Airtel Money, M-Pesa, these databases, they're being maintained by people outside. And those people charge heavily to these companies, and KRA is getting his fair chunk of revenue. So it's not at all loss, but there is so much also that we could get, which we are not. So that's what we are trying to see how we can improve.
Very quickly, Madam Doris, Stella raised the issue of tax. Authorities should not act surprised that a business exists and then they slap you with a fine for not having known you're there for a year. But then there's the question of how do we incentivize this relationship so that taxpayers bring themselves up?
Thank you. I think the first point to note is that the tax systems we are operating or implementing are pretty much similar to others in the rest of the world. They're based on self-assessment, where the obligation is on the client, on the taxpayer, to present themselves to the tax administration first for registration, second for returning of income, thirdly for payment of income in an accurate manner. Those are the 4 obligations of a taxpayer. And from a self-assessment perspective, it's not the job really of a tax administration to go around looking for businesses. That's going to happen when perhaps the tax administration gets information about the existence of a business that is not on the tax register. And woe betide that business when they come across it. Because not only will they be registered, but they will also be penalized very heavily. So I think, one, like we had before, it's imperative for taxpayers to know their obligations to the tax administration and follow them through. But how can the tax administrations incentivize businesses that have not been compliant to come forward? We've heard about voluntary disclosure arrangements or voluntary disclosure policies that have been routinely used by tax administrations to encourage those that have been non-compliant to come forth and pay or declare pay what they are supposed to pay over a period and perhaps be exempted or their penalties and interest be remitted or waived. So they will be obliged to pay the principal tax and then from that day forward remain compliant. That is one of the schemes that can be used. Other schemes that can be used, amnesties, where the tax administration will say, we will go back 3 years and forgive everyone their taxes, but from this day forward, we expect everyone to come and register and pay their taxes. But if you don't come and pay your taxes from this day forward, then maximum penalties and fines will be imposed on you, as well as other very deterrent measures in order to make one an example of those others that are non-compliant. I would also like to mention, I think, something that Stella raised about what did those other countries that made Google, I believe, and others pay some tax. I think it went back to the principle of, call it a recharacterization. Regardless of how sophisticated your tax planning has been, it goes back to the question, do you actually have, I think for Starbucks, do you actually have a coffee shop at every corner on the street? And the answer is yes. Are you serving this coffee for free? And the answer is no. So if you do have a coffee shop at perhaps every second corner, and people are paying for this coffee, then it means you've earned some income in this country. And we should be seeing some money coming from this company into the coffers of this country. I think, I don't know the details of how they resolved it, but I think it really revolved around that. You earned income in this country, and we're not taking any explanations about you having structured your taxes so conveniently not to pay tax in this country. And I think for the rest, maybe we need to be adopting such practices where we see very conveniently structured tax arrangements being done with support from tax treaties and other such arrangements. Someone might call it tax avoidance, but in reality, it's a legalized form of tax evasion.
Interesting, and that conversation certainly will not end now. Let us have the absolute final question from the gentleman at that corner, and then we'll wrap this.
Okay, thank you. My name is Amos Kiptui, and I had a question to the panel, but specifically to Mr. Bade, Madam Wayo, and Mr. Raul. How do we balance between creating an enabling environment for innovation while introducing taxation, fairly taking tax for the government? And what are the best practices from other countries that have been successful in taxing the digital economy?
Right, because of time, I would like to have Gareth take that question, and then we wrap, okay? Gareth?
Thank you. There are mechanisms in place already in Kenya to incentivize sectors of the economy. So whether that's through enterprise zones or specific provisions of the legislation that businesses can avail themselves of in order to stimulate economic activity in particular sectors. So what the Treasury and the revenue here need to decide is whether they feel that it is appropriate for those to be available to ICT companies, and some of them are. So the Special Economic Zone legislation, for example, does incorporate specifically ICT within their zone and the tax incentives that exist there, or whether they want to perhaps incentivize incubators like Strathmore and iHub to encourage entrepreneurial development of the sector. Because going forward, if that's going to be a key driver of the economy, then I think it's a point that Richard made earlier, is that you can kill it early if you overtax it in a development stage, because there's going to be high levels of investment required and a prospect that a lot of business models don't actually see break-even points for the first 3 to 5 years. So technology businesses can be strangled at birth by too much regulation, too much taxation. So if it is a policy and it's a Vision 2030 objective in order to encourage the digital economy and technology businesses to flourish in the country, then some mechanisms already are there in the law, and the Treasury could incentivize further in subsequent budgets going forward. So it's a very important point to make, is that there's a lot of domestic talent and that there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit within the sector, and it can be encouraged, and I think it should be.
Right, great, and I think that brings us to a landing and the end of this conversation. Well, the conversation will continue because we have coffee outdoor, but I'd like to give a special thanks to my panelists, Raul for the keynote, Dr. Ayua, Gareth, Madam McCall, and Mr. Richard for your thoughts on this very important question of digitization. Like we said, this has taken the lion's share of a lot of conversations in this summit, and certainly will do for the next few days. So even as we break from this session, feel free to continue with some of this conversation. Hopefully, we'll get better working examples for that. I'd like to call to adjourn this gathering now. There's coffee outside, and very quick announcement, tomorrow the sessions we will not be meeting here. We'll be having 2 concurrent breakout sessions on the 4th floor. So if you just go to your programs, you'll be able to choose which one suits you. It will be from 8:30 to 2 o'clock, different sessions that will be running, and then in the afternoon is when we'll have a common gathering. Thank you very much. Good evening.